The recording is now in progress.
I was waiting for you to start the meeting, but I'm glad that we're here and gonna start the Wildlife Wire pod. Mark, how are you feeling today?
Ooh, I'm getting zoomed in on. Uh, I'm feeling good, it was a wonderful weekend, and that's kicked off with a beautiful celebration of Dr. Jane Goodall's birthday at the governor's mansion here in Denver. We had a lot of wildlife advocates out. The governor and first gentleman were there and talked about their time with her and how she was such a force, even beyond her work with animals, just breaking down barriers and I always admired the way she could so politely tell someone you're wrong.
Yeah, she's pretty iconic at that. And she and I share a birthday, Mark. So while you were celebrating Jane without me, I had to celebrate myself alone, all by myself.
I wish we had a violin uh, to insert there. Well,
Uh,
while I get a consolatory prize by you may have a birthday that you share with Jane Goodall, but I share my birthday with Governor Polis.
well, you lucky duck, you. I think that we both had fun weekends, and I digress. I was not alone. I did have friends with me that actually care about me, which obviously wasn't you. And then I
No,
had I had plenty of whiskey and lovely flowers sent to my house. So it was a good birthday all around.
well, good. Happy birthday.
Thank you. And speaking of things that are happy, I guess maybe we should change our tune. Today we're really going to talk about how legislative processes work and talk through our own bills to show folks what happens when you've got a happy idea for wildlife that may do a little bit better for the world. And where that idea starts and how the legislative process works, because I think a lot of folks don't really know. You all of a sudden see a new law and you're like, what happened? How did that get there? So we'll schoolhouse rock it a little bit, but specific to wildlife bills today. And I think that what we'll do is we can start with your bill, Mark, because each of us ran a bill this session. You ran one on rodenticides. I ran one on wildfire and beavers. You're still running one, I guess I should say, present tense. I am not, I'm dead. But I'd love for you to share a little bit about how you came up with the concept for a rodenticide bill for the Colorado legislature this year.
Yeah, it was multiple years in the making, and it spawned from my own observations, seeing coyotes in the wild suffering from mange and learning more about how rodenticides can make the impacts on whether a coyote or a fox, mountain lion, or raptors, how rodenticides can amplify uh, that uh, in this case mange that I was seeing, but it will also have immune system compromises in general. You in raptors, it can affect their ability to fly, and it's all kinds of things. So I'd been looking for a sponsor for this for 3 sessions, and it wasn't until last summer that uh, finally got someone locked in, and so uh, kind of a background on all bills. Like some bills are originated from the legislator themselves, but oftentimes it comes from either talking with their constituents or advocates in a given space, and then relying on them to you be the ones to help craft the language, help people understand why these bills are important, and to do that, in Colorado, a legislator can only run 5 bills and then if anything beyond that, they have to ask for permission to run more bills. So it's always really tough to get in because you're sometimes they have 10 bills from last session that they wanted to do, but they didn't have space for. And so you're vying for competition there. You're vying for competition for other new ideas. So it's a really tough battle just to get a legislator to say yes, I'll be the sponsor on it. And
And who
then
was your sponsor, Mark?
yeah, so it started with Senator Kip, and but she knew that she wasn't going to be able to run it in her first five. So she helped find Senator Cutter, and so Cutter took it up as one of hers. And then, and like I was talking about with those exceptions, Senator Kip asked for her to be added on, and that would be a late bill, so it didn't count as one of her five. And then in the House, we had Representative Velasco, or have Representative Velasco. And then when it moved into the House from the Senate, we had Representative Brown sign on as well. So,
Awesome.
yeah, so uh, you there was a clear need, and it goes beyond. This one's interesting because it goes beyond wildlife. These poisons affect our children and our pets as well, and so just a really important kind of broad bill to get some reform on. uh,
Yeah. And
and
I think we do that too. I think what we both did was look around us, notice a problem, and both of us are well versed in wildlife policy. So both of our problems had a wildlife type solution or angle. For me, when I look in my backyard in Grand County, we've had tremendous threat from wildfire. And we know beavers are a natural ally against wildfire. My dad was a fireman. I have always volunteered with the fire department, volunteer with the Park Service, with search and rescue, and seeing the opportunity for beavers to really assist us in a free way was how I approached my legislation. And looking at how do we stop killing beavers so they can do the job of firefighters, and also with drought mitigation on the lands where they belong. So that was really my piece of legislation, was looking at a solution for that. And thanks to you, Rep. Lindsay and I were able to have a great conversation about beavers. We are beaver believers, and she was really willing to carry the torch on this one.
no
Pun intended, with
torches.
no torches, because we've got lots of fire issues around us. Uh, and that's really how these bills start. Oftentimes it's someone who's passionate about something with an idea and starts talking to legislators and say, "Hey, what can we do about this?" And so we went from there to both getting an actual bill draft and doing our next favorite thing, which is stakeholding.
Yeah.
What is stakeholding, Mark? What does it mean to you?
Well, before we jump into stakeholding, I also
Uh,
want to just quickly touch on you. So you have an idea for a bill. There's oftentimes, like in the case of rodenticides, there's kind of two different ways you can go about it. You can go go big and make it as strict and as broad as possible, and then see what can end up staying at the end. That was the route that we went with rodenticides, and it allowed us to whittle down to something that was still meaningful, but allowed for it to actually move through the legislature. The other route is like crafting it to be the perfect bill, and there is a chance that those do go through, but the downside on those is it doesn't leave a lot of room for negotiation with other legislators or with stakeholders that we'll touch on in a second. Uh,
mm-hmm,
so,
mm-hmm.
uh, but but it gets rid of some of the initial opposition that you would find through stakeholding or other legislators. So it's always tricky to figure out which direction you want to start in. But and if there was a right answer and someone knows it, please tell me because I think
Well, I think
there is no answer for that question.
And I think we both kind of did this differently, right? Like, I think that we tried to introduce what was pretty close to a perfect bill. Like, we did all of those amendments and edits prior to introduction of our bill. And I think you started big and then did the amendments and edits as the bill was already introduced and brought them along. So, one of the big reasons we do this is because there's so many different people invested in the outcomes of the legislative process, and we call those people stakeholders. They usually represent bigger groups of people, and they'll have like one lobbyist or one policy person that you're talking to that represent a number of constituents from different backgrounds. And for you, that was often pest control agencies or health focused people, or, talk a little bit about your stakeholder process and who was invested in the outcomes of rodenticides.
Yeah, again, because it's so rodents are everywhere, and this topic affects, you know, people's homes, businesses, schools, uh, your, the agricultural community, uh, healthcare, all of these folks. I mean, the stakeholdering process was quite broad, uh, and uh, and still even ongoing as we speak today, trying to figure out who's remaining that is in opposition to it that uh, may not be in opposition if they understand where we're at now and how what the actual impacts would be to their business or their communities. And so, it is a lot is figuring out, okay, well, why is someone invested in this topic? Where can I accommodate them? Where do I have to stand firm and potentially lose their support? And then how do we explain that going forward to the legislators? So, yeah, I mean, it was super, super broad, like over 70 different groups that we engaged with, either directly or through their lobbyist. Sometimes, with a contract lobbyist, they are uh, representing a lot of those groups uh, through their own clients. So talking with one person can then relay that information out to those different stakeholders. But you know, it's tricky. You at the end of the day, you also have to evaluate, well, where do these particular stakeholders fall on other bills? Are they generally in opposition to anything wildlife related? Or is this a one-off where it's actually something that we need to dive into a little bit more? Is it a useful way to spend our time, or should we just accept that they're not going to move on this because every other wildlife bill in recent history they've been in opposition to? So, it's a case by case analysis on how you engage with them. How was
Ye-
yours?
How was mine? Mine was intense, but I think, what we had really tried to do with the beaver bill was to write everybody out of the bill before it was introduced, except for recreational beaver hunters and trappers. So that was it. The only opposition to the bill should have been recreational beaver hunters and trappers. And what we'd done with this process was really we'd looked at Colorado Department of Forestry has a map of moderate to high wildfire intensity. And so we were looking at areas where beavers could be most beneficial. And we looked within the fire intensity map on areas where beavers could belong. And we really looked at a perfect overlay as public land. So a way to get more beavers is to kill less beavers. And every single beaver wetland matters, right? So if we stop the recreational killing of beavers on public lands, then we have the opportunity for beavers to establish themselves and also to um, move forward with a new habitat because they're density dependent. They need to have enough beavers in one area for them to move and colonize another area. So I digress. That was our goal. We did robust stakeholding with water interest groups to write them out of the bill. So folks that provide water across the state and used their language to write them out. We met with agricultural groups and they were fully exempted from our bill. We met with Colorado Parks and Wildlife and had an amendment ready to go to write them out of the bill. So if anyone had a case where it was biologically necessary to kill a beaver, CPW could authorize permits to recreational hunters and trappers. So all of this was laid out to get to a very small solution. And so we did all of that stakeholding up front and a lot of it before the bill was even introduced. And then we amended the bill in an attempt to get everyone out of that bill that we didn't want in there. We just said, okay, these species are so important to us right now. Let's just remove the for funsies part, like the killing for funsies. Let's maybe take that away while we figure out how to get these animals back where we want them. And that's something CPW itself has acknowledged it needed. So we do this. We both go through amendments to appease stakeholders, and we both change our bills. I changed mine up front. You changed yours down the line through the process. And then we get our big committee assignments, which is our next step. Like you've got your bill, you're ready to introduce, and then you get assigned to a committee after introduction. And where do wildlife bills go? Mark.
They generally go to die,
But yes, besides that, which committee
and
do they
they
go
do
to?
that through the either House or Senate agricultural and natural resources committees.
Yes. So those committees that hear wildlife bills are by intent, by structure, agriculturally focused. And so we've got a lot of folks from districts that sit on those committees that are invested in agricultural interests that often receive funding for their campaigns from agricultural interests and who sit on these committees and hear our bills on wildlife issues. So it's always a point of consideration for us when we've got a bill, how do we work with these legislators to make sure it gets out of committee? Because it needs to get out of committee to go to a floor vote. So you started in the Senate and I started in the House. And tell me a bit about the Senate, because I know it's a smaller committee, right, than the House committee. And so you go to that committee and then you have a hearing. What's that like? What's that process like?
Yeah, you know, I prefer the Senate to start in, um, mainly because you need four votes there, and out of seven people, where in the House you need seven out of 13. So uh, the pros are when you go to the Senate and you have concerns, there are folks that are, like you reach out to them, but it's going to be a no. I'm not going to say
Yeah.
if it's party associated or what have you. People can look at the voting records on their own. But it allows for me, it's okay. I have one or two people, senators, that I need to focus all of my efforts on and figure out, again, more of those compromises, coming up with amendments while we're working together, and then doing everything we can to make those amendments happen to ensure we can get their votes. Uh, you when you go to the House, it's just there's more variables there, right? So uh, you're spreading yourself thinner. You're relying on the word of seven people instead of the word of four people. So it's just, to me, it's just inherently more risky to start in the House. And even, now that we have got through Senate agriculture, got all the Dems voted yes in on the Senate floor. So we've had 100% of the Democrats vote yes for it, 100% of the Republicans so far vote no for it. And so kind of gives us a gauge of, okay, again, we need to focus more on the Democrats now. And, but still, we're fighting to get some of those votes, where every other Democrat in the other chamber had already shown that they support it, and that you know tough votes in Senate agriculture were already obtained by through compromise through amendments. But we're still now fighting that same battle that you started in and ended in, uh, because it's a really tough committee, no matter what the political affiliation is. And I think a lot of that just has to do with the the naming of that committee, whether in the House or in the Senate. Agriculture is first, and natural resources. I also generally I don't believe that wildlife are natural resources. I think gold and other minerals are resources, but when it comes to living beings, that's they shouldn't be labeled that way. Uh, but that putting agriculture first kind of puts it through that lens of how does this affect agriculture and then everything else.
Right, right. And I think that's really tough about, wildlife bills and committee assignments is that, by structure, wildlife bills are filtered through agriculture first, right? And, and by structure in Colorado Parks and wildlife bills are filtered through commissioners who are required by statute to be a majority from consumptive interests.
Or
And so by
agriculture. Yeah.
yeah, including agriculture. And so I think that the hard part is when you're looking at bills that are scientifically justified, that are backed by the public, if you were to look at public, public polling, they're backed by the public. Ultimately, the politics of it all can kill good bills or kill good rules or kill good ballot initiatives. I think at the end of the day, we've got a lot of different forces in play, and that's why I wanted our listeners to hear this is, this is how bills move through the legislature. And just because you've got majority Democrats on a committee doesn't mean environmentally friendly bills or animal friendly bills are going to pass. And just because someone's a Republican doesn't mean that they're not going to support a wildlife friendly bill, right? And so I would always encourage folks to continue talking to your legislators and make sure that they know that you're invested in this issue. And so for me, when we go to the House Committee on Agriculture, it's you already have the odds kind of stacked against you just because of the interest groups that are represented on those committees. And I think it's really tough when you've got such a clean bill that only, again, impacts one small group of people, but provides benefits to all Coloradans to see, the kind of misinformation that can hit different legislators when you're not expecting it, and how misinformation can prevail even in the face of facts, too. And the way that testimony was structured for us was it was all opposition first, and then all in support second. And I didn't particularly like that structure. I think the back and forth is better. But when all opposition goes first, and then they put CPW second and kind of put them in with that crowd, even though they're neutral on the bill with amendments, um, we see bills go, you see the writing on the wall, at that point where you're like, okay, this is what's going to happen. So it doesn't matter on my side if I've got the former chief of biological services for the National Park Service saying this is a good bill, who's, one of the leading scientists in the country, or if I have a fire chief saying we need this, or a wildland firefighter saying I've hand pumped from beaver wetlands to protect property before, and these are important. It does not matter because they've already heard all of this misinformation at the beginning to protect this tiny group of people. And it's really interesting. And I think it's kind of sad too to see that where there's all of these little institutions in place that protect this small user group while really leaving the rest of us pretty vulnerable to the impacts of those decisions. So I was disappointed and I did die in committee and I did have two sponsors on the House side. I had Velasco and Lindsay, and then I had Cutter and Kip on the Senate side. So if we'd gone over there, we would have had sponsors there too. And ultimately, our bill was voted down. And I think that, what happens after that is really important for all of us to hold the legislature accountable for their votes and to really be grateful for folks who are willing to stick up for wildlife and stick up for what's right in the face of a machine that wasn't built for wildlife. So, Mark, let's hear where's your bill now? How's it doing? Because you're still alive, I'm dead. Where is it now?
Yeah, we are currently still in the House Agricultural Committee. We did our testimony last week, but delayed the vote because we it was too close to know if we had the votes or not. And so we'll most likely have the votes next week. And so it gives us a little bit more time to reach those legislators that are still undecided or soft on a position, either yes or no. And so hopefully you we will get understanding from those undecided folks and be able to make it out of the House Ag Committee. I'm confident that once it gets to the floor, we will have those votes. But it's just getting getting the folks that need to feel assured that they're making the right decision all lined up to make that decision in support of the bill.
Yeah, and your bill is interesting too because in your prior amendments, you were able to bring around the Colorado Department of Agriculture that actually is supportive of your bill. And you brought around Terminex, who's supportive of your bill. And I think that, the your ability and willingness to compromise brought a lot of support from different areas, and yet still we have to wait out this House process. And I think that it's really cool to see how well you've done that with ag and with Terminex. And I'm just really impressed by that. So I think no matter how the House vote goes, which I'm sure will go in your favor, but no matter how it goes, I think that you've done a heck of a job compromising on this bill and making it so it's workable for all parties involved.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Yeah, it honestly is one of my greatest accomplishments in my career, uh, being in the Senate Agricultural Committee on the first panel, sitting next to Terminex and next to Colorado Department of Ag, all in favor of this bill. And, for me, I am one who can say, okay, I don't necessarily agree that we need to be using these at all or in general use beyond emergency situations. But I can agree with you on specifics and say, here are my values and here is the realities. And if we can all be in agreement on the realities, then that doesn't mean that, now I'm going to be out there, championing the use of rodenticides by any professional all the time. What I can say is that when getting to the point of something passable that is meaningful and we can have support of pest control or support of the Department of Ag, I certainly welcome that, and I am thankful for those uh, opportunities to come together and say, yeah, we I don't think we necessarily agree with everything or are super pumped about all facets of it, and be appreciative of their support and their ability to talk about things that I am not as well versed in. So like Terminix, the actual application of rodenticides and figuring out, we had a prior amendment that had both Terminix and CDA supporting uh, a lot of that language in there talking about using them as last resort or indoor use first or through verified activity of rodents through like electronic rodent monitoring. All of that, like that's outside of my scope, and and most of that originated, from Terminix saying, well, this is real world application of these, and this is how we could still allow their use because that's in Terminix's best interests, but use them in the most responsible way we can. And like, when you're able to meet someone who would generally be in opposition and break through that immediate, you're the enemy, you're wrong, blah blah blah, all of that stuff, and actually try to figure out common ground issues. I mean, that's where I strive to be on any wildlife policy, whether that's through the legislature or through CPW. But when you do that, you do risk you pushback from your community, whether me and wildlife advocacy or pest control folks, you being upset with a stance of let's try to figure this out instead of just kill the bill. You it's it's dangerous ground sometimes, and especially with a nonprofit, it you lose some of your ability to fundraise too. Like
Yeah.
it's always sweeter to get a clear victory than say, hey, we compromised. Especially if you're in opposition, you don't have to compromise, you can just try to kill something. So my hat's off to anyone out there who initially disagrees with something and then comes to the table and says, I don't agree with this as written, but here are some suggestions, and go from there.
Yeah. And I think that's how, durable legislation passes, is by people being willing to come to that table and say, hey, this is what we need to do. And I think that, with the beaver bill, unfortunately, even though Colorado Parks and Wildlife was neutral, I think there were still plenty of staff people who were opposed because they don't want to see anyone else messing with wildlife other than Colorado Parks and Wildlife or hunters and trappers and anglers. So, when we had a panel of Colorado Parks and Wildlife staff testify, we were never even alerted that that panel was going to testify. When we reached out to Colorado Parks and Wildlife for amendments to write them out of the bill, allowing them to still allow for recreational hunting and trapping of beaver when biologically necessary, it took them months to come back to us with the language for an amendment that would work on writing them out of that bill. And so I think that, some of these institutions sit there to reinforce each other, right? Where we've got Colorado Parks and Wildlife often works to reinforce the viewpoint of trappers and hunters. And even though, I can be transparent in my value system and say, I hunt, I don't trap, I fish, I don't believe carnivores need to be killed, period. Like that's just where I'm at. And I think that that's okay to hold that belief. It's backed by a lot of science and a lot of my own personal experience, and that's where I hold my belief. But what we don't hear from Colorado Parks and Wildlife are their values. We don't know the value system. We know it based on their decisions, but they're not transparent about what's a values-based decision and what's a scientifically justified decision. And if so, what question is that science asking? And how is it being answered? Is it being answered by peer-reviewed science? Is it being answered by a voluntary survey? Is it being answered, directly by, a self-selected stakeholder group? Um, and so one of the things, with the beaver legislation that was noted in the committee hearing was that Colorado Parks and Wildlife right now has a beaver management plan that they're working on now that has been published, and it should have some time for them to implement. Now, the problem with it's a beaver management strategy document, is that there's no implementation plan for it. So if you create a strategy advised by stakeholder groups, it doesn't automatically become the rule to follow. It's a framework that should guide decisions by the agency going forward. So this legislation would have given the agency a rule to follow that complemented their plan, which acknowledged all of the benefits of beavers across the landscape. And yet the legislature was hesitant to do so. And I think that it leaves the door open that if Colorado Parks and Wildlife chooses to not follow its own framework, then we can certainly come back with legislation again, and we'll have a demonstrative case of them not implementing that plan and that framework. So I'm hopeful we can work within their framework and get some better regulations for beavers, but we'll have to see. It's just going to be a longer process for us and hopefully a little shorter for you because you're not dead yet. You've got a hearing in what, 2 weeks? A week?
Yeah, a week at the earliest. It's not on the schedule yet, so we'll see.
Well, I want to be there on signing day if it becomes a law, and I'm really optimistic about yours. And next time, I'd like to really take our listeners through, how misinformation can deter these kinds of campaigns. And, we touched on that a little bit with the beaver legislation. And we see this in a lot of our work with both Mark and my work on carnivores, where misinformation just runs amok very often. And, also how the media picks up that information. Because if the media is reporting on misinformation over and over again, it starts to act as if it's fact, like that information just becomes fact and it's not. So I think walking through that next week would be really helpful for our listeners. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, it goes into all facets that we've worked through, whether it's through the legislature, through uh, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, or through ballot initiative.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I I still cringe and also admire the boldness of the wildlife deserves better being pro mountain lion hunting. I always thought that was I was like I'm impressed that you went with this. Like it's insane that you're saying wildlife deserves better and we need to kill 600 lions a year. Hey, incredible the misinformation just in that name and
Yeah.
what they were pushing.
Yeah, we've got a lot of misnomers out there that we can touch on, I think. And really, I think going through the misinformation and the reshaping of how wildlife was managed in Colorado, since the 1990s is really helpful. And a lot of other states have had similar issues, so we can touch on those too. So it's been an honor and a privilege, Mark. I am glad you're still alive. I'm sad that I'm dead, but we shall persist nonetheless.
We shall overcome.
Bye.
This has been an episode of the Wildlife Wire with me, Mark Searles, and my co host, Samantha Miller. Thank you for listening.